There are moments in life when everything seems uncertain, when the road ahead is unclear, and when it feels like you've been forgotten. But what if what you see as delay is actually divine preparation? What if the silence is not abandonment, but the setting of the stage for something greater? What if the struggle, the waiting, the hardship, all of it is part of a grand design, a divine setup for an outpouring of blessing beyond anything you could imagine? From the very beginning, God has worked through preparation. Before the world was formed, he spoke light into darkness. Before Joseph became a ruler, he was thrown into a pit. Before the Israelites entered the promised land, they wandered in the wilderness. And before the Messiah stepped into his glory, he bore the weight of the cross. What looked like suffering, like setbacks, like detours, was all part of a plan so perfect that no man could have scripted it. You are no different. Right now you may be walking through a season of waiting, a time when prayers seem unanswered and doors appear closed. But what if the closed door is not rejection, but redirection? What if the delay is not denial, but preparation? What if the very things you see as obstacles are the stepping stones that will lead you into the greatest blessing of your life? Look at Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, visions of God's favor, but instead of seeing them fulfilled immediately, he found himself betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, falsely accused and imprisoned. It would have been easy for him to believe that God had abandoned him. But in reality, every step of his journey was orchestrated for a purpose. The pit led to Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house led to the prison, and the prison led to the palace. What the enemy meant for evil, God used for good. The very trials that seemed to be destroying him were the tools God used to position him for his destiny. And so it is with you. The delay is not the end. The hardship is not the conclusion of your story. The struggle is not a sign that God has forgotten you. In fact, it is the opposite. The struggle is evidence that he is at work, preparing you, refining you, strengthening you for what is to come. If you could see the full picture, if you could see what he is orchestrating behind the scenes, you would not fear, you would not doubt, you would rejoice because God is setting you up for something greater than you can imagine. What seems like a delay in your life is often God's way of preparing you for something far greater than what you can currently see. It is easy to grow weary when prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain closed, and when the timeline of your life does not align with your expectations. The human heart is wired to desire immediate answers, quick resolutions, and instant breakthroughs. But God does not operate according to human timetables. His delays are not denials. They are divine setups for a blessing that is beyond your comprehension. Throughout Scripture, we see that whenever God was about to do something great, there was a period of waiting. Abraham was promised that he would be the father of many nations, yet he waited years before Isaac was born. Joseph had dreams of greatness, yet he spent years in slavery and imprisonment before stepping into his destiny. Moses knew he was called to deliver Israel, yet he spent 40 years in the wilderness before God sent him back to Egypt. David was anointed as king, yet he lived as a fugitive before he ascended to the throne. Even the Messiah himself spent 30 years in preparation before stepping into his divine mission. The pattern is clear. God does not rush. He prepares. Waiting can feel frustrating, but that is only because the human perspective is limited. If you could see what God sees, you would understand that the delay is not a mistake. The blessing you are waiting for is being prepared, but at the same time, you are being prepared for the blessing. A child does not inherit an estate before they are mature enough to handle it. In the same way, God will not release something into your life that you are not yet equipped to steward. His plan is not just to give you a blessing, but to make you into someone who can carry that blessing without it destroying you. There are times when the delay is meant to teach dependence on God. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they learned to trust him for their daily bread, for water, for direction. Had they entered the promised land too soon, they would not have been ready to take possession of it. Sometimes God allows a season of waiting so that you will learn to trust him more deeply, to lean not on your own understanding, but to rely fully on him. The longer the wait, the deeper the faith that is built, and the greater the testimony when the breakthrough finally comes. Another reason for God's delays is that the circumstances surrounding your life must align with his divine plan. If Joseph had been released from prison too soon, he would not have been positioned to interpret Pharaoh's dream. If David had taken the throne immediately, he would not have developed the character needed to rule as a man after God's heart. If Jesus had begun his ministry too early, the fullness of prophecy would not have been fulfilled. Timing matters. The delay is not just about you, it is about everything that must come together for the perfect unfolding of God's purpose. Many times when God delays something, it is because what he is preparing for you is far greater than what you originally asked for. If he answered immediately, you might receive something smaller than what he truly intends to give. Hannah prayed for a child, and for years it seemed that God was silent. But when she finally conceived, she did not just have a child, she gave birth to Samuel, one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. The waiting was not a denial. It was a setup for something far more significant than she could have imagined. The same is true in your life. What seems like a delay is not an accident. God is aligning everything, refining you, positioning you, and preparing you for a blessing that is beyond what you could ask or think. If you could see behind the veil, if you could see how every closed door, every unanswered prayer, and every season of waiting is weaving together for something glorious, you would not despair, you would rejoice. Because when God finally moves, when he opens the door, when he releases the blessing, it will be perfect, complete, and undeniable. The delay is not a rejection, it is a divine setup for something greater. Trials and setbacks are not roadblocks to your destiny. They are the very path that leads you to it. When life takes unexpected turns, when you face betrayal, loss, disappointment, or failure, it is easy to assume that you have been derailed from your purpose. But in reality, every challenge, every hardship, every closed door is being used by God to position you exactly where you need to be. What appears to be an obstacle is often the very thing that will propel you into the fulfillment of God's divine plan for your life. Joseph's life is a testimony of how trials are actually stepping stones to destiny. He was given dreams of greatness as a young man, but before those dreams were fulfilled, he was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. To the natural eye, it looked as though everything in his life was going wrong, but in reality, every step of that painful journey was leading him closer to his purpose. Had he not been sold, he would not have entered Egypt. Had he not been falsely accused, he would not have been placed in Pharaoh's prison. Had he not been in that prison, he would not have met the cupbearer who would later introduce him to Pharaoh. And had he not met Pharaoh, he would not have been elevated to a position where he could save an entire nation and his own family. The trials did not block his destiny. They were the very path that led him into it. This pattern is seen throughout Scripture. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house, but had to flee to the wilderness for 40 years before he was ready to lead Israel out of Egypt. David was anointed as king, but spent years running from Saul before he took the throne. Even the Messiah himself was rejected, betrayed, and crucified before he entered into his glory. The greatest victories often come through the greatest struggles. When trials come, it is natural to ask why. Why did this happen? Why did that person betray me? Why did I lose that opportunity? But the better question is, how is God using this for my good? The enemy may try to use circumstances to discourage, delay, or destroy you, but what he intends for evil, God turns for good. Every setback is an opportunity for God to move in a way that only he can. Trials refine and prepare you for the blessings ahead. Just as gold is purified through fire, faith is strengthened through trials. A person who has never faced adversity, who has never been tested, who has never endured hardship, is not equipped to carry great responsibility. When God allows you to go through difficult seasons, he is not punishing you. He is preparing you. He is building perseverance, shaping your character, increasing your faith, and teaching you to trust him even when you cannot see the full picture. Setbacks also redirect you to where you need to be. Sometimes what seems like a loss is actually God moving you into the right position. A closed door might be God's way of leading you to a better opportunity. A betrayal might be the means by which He removes people who cannot go with you into the next season. A delay might be the very thing that prevents you from stepping into something too soon. What looks like disappointment today may later be revealed as a divine redirection towards something greater than you ever imagined. The story of Joseph, Moses, David, and many others shows that destiny is not a straight path. It is filled with twists, turns, delays, and detours. But in the hands of God, every trial is transformed into a testimony. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity. Every setback is simply a setup for something greater. The key is to remain faithful, to trust in God's timing, and to recognize that nothing is wasted in His plan. No tear, no hardship, no betrayal, no delay is meaningless. If you are facing trials, do not despair. Do not believe the lie that your purpose has been derailed. Instead, stand firm in the knowledge that God is working all things together for your good. The very things that seem to be holding you back may be the things that are actually launching you forward. The pain you endure today may be the preparation for the blessing that is coming tomorrow. Your trials are not the end of your story. They are the path that will lead you into your God-ordained destiny. The wilderness is not a punishment. It is a place of preparation. When God has a great calling on your life, He does not rush you into the promise. He first leads you through a season of refining, a place where He shapes you, humbles you, and teaches you to rely on Him completely. The wilderness is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to prepare you for the blessing that is coming. It is the place where God strips away the things that do not belong, where He builds endurance, where He teaches you to trust Him even when the way is unclear. The Israelites were delivered from slavery in Egypt with a mighty hand. They witnessed the Red Sea part before their eyes, saw water flow from a rock, and ate manna that fell from heaven. Yet, before they could enter the promised land, they had to go through the wilderness. What should have been an 11-day journey turned into 40 years of wandering. Why? Because while they had left Egypt, Egypt had not left them. They still carried the mindset of slavery, the doubt, the fear, the tendency to complain rather than trust. The wilderness was the place where God was preparing them to step into their inheritance. Had they gone in too soon, they would have lacked the faith and character to take possession of the land. The wilderness is a season of stripping away. In Egypt, the Israelites depended on their oppressors for provision. In the wilderness, they had to learn to depend on God. The manna came daily. They could not store it, hoard it, or rely on their own strength. God was teaching them that He alone was their source. When He leads you into the wilderness, it is because He is removing false dependencies. He strips away the things you once leaned on so that you learn to lean on Him alone. The wilderness is also a place of testing. Before Jesus began His ministry, He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. It was there in a place of isolation and hunger that the enemy came to tempt Him. But each time Jesus responded with the Word of God. The wilderness reveals what is truly in your heart. It tests your faith, your perseverance, and your dependence on God's promises. When things do not go as planned, when prayers seem unanswered, when circumstances seem barren, will you trust that God is still in control? In the wilderness, God reshapes your identity. The Israelites saw themselves as former slaves, but God was calling them to be a kingdom of priests, a chosen people. Before you can step into the fullness of what God has for you, He must first transform the way you see yourself. If you carry the baggage of the past, the doubts, the insecurities, the fear, you will not be able to fully walk in His promises. The wilderness is where He removes the lies of the enemy and replaces them with His truth. The wilderness also teaches obedience. When the Israelites moved, they moved at the command of God. If the pillar of cloud stayed, they stayed. If it moved, they moved. They were learning to follow His leading, to trust His guidance, even when they did not understand. God teaches the same lesson today. The wilderness is where you learn to listen to His voice, to move when He says move, and to wait when He says wait. The wilderness may feel like a delay, but it is actually an acceleration. It is where God works on you, refines you, strengthens you so that when you enter your promised land, you are ready to handle the blessing. Those who try to bypass the wilderness, who resist the refining process, often find themselves unprepared for what they have been asking for. God does not just want to bless you, He wants to make sure you can carry that blessing without it crushing you. If you are in a wilderness season, do not despise it. Do not mistake it for punishment. It is a place of preparation, a place where God is equipping you for something greater. The wilderness is not the end of the journey, it is the path to the promise. Stay faithful, trust in God's process, and know that when the time is right, He will bring you out stronger, wiser, and ready to walk into everything He has prepared for you. When God is preparing you for something new, He will remove what cannot go with you. There are seasons in life when certain relationships, habits, or mindsets must be left behind in order to step into the fullness of His plan. It is not always easy, and it is not always what you would choose, but when God is taking you higher, He also requires that you let go of what is holding you back. The blessings He has for you require space, and sometimes that means releasing things that no longer serve His purpose in your life. Abraham was called to a land that God would show him, but before he could receive the promise, he had to leave his father's house. It was not just about a physical location, it was about separating from the familiar, from the influences of his past, from the place that would limit what God wanted to do. Had he stayed where he was, he would not have seen the fulfillment of the covenant. Sometimes God calls you to move forward, but in order to do so, you must leave behind the things that tie you to your past. There are relationships that may have been good for one season, but cannot continue into the next. When God is preparing you for greater things, not everyone can go with you. Some people are tied to your past, but not to your destiny. When Lot and Abraham traveled together, there came a point when their herds and possessions were too great to coexist in the same land. Abraham gave Lot the choice of where to go, and they separated. It was after Lot had left that God reaffirmed His promise to Abraham. Some blessings are only revealed after a separation takes place. There are people in your life who may have been a part of your journey, but if they are not aligned with where God is taking you, He will allow a separation to occur. Letting go is difficult because it requires trust. It requires faith that what God is bringing is greater than what you are leaving behind. The Israelites struggled with this when they left Egypt. Though they had been enslaved, they still longed for the familiarity of Egypt when they faced difficulties in the wilderness. They wanted to return to what was comfortable, even though it was bondage. This is why God had to take them through a process of renewal, breaking the mindset of slavery and preparing them for the land of... If you are too attached to what is behind you, you will never fully grasp what is ahead. Sometimes it is not just relationships or places that must be left behind, but ways of thinking. The greatest battle is often in the mind. Fear, doubt, insecurity. These things can keep you from walking in the fullness of God's plan. The spies who scouted the promised land saw giants and declared that they were like grasshoppers in their own eyes. Their perception of themselves kept them from entering the land that God had already promised them. What you believe about yourself, about God, about your future, these things determine whether you step into your destiny or remain stuck in the wilderness. God will challenge and change your mindset before He takes you to the next level. The process of removal is not always pleasant. It can feel like loss, like uncertainty, like a stripping away of things that seemed essential. But what feels like loss in the moment is often God's way of making room for something better. A tree that bears fruit must be pruned, dead branches must be cut off so that new growth can come. The process may seem painful, but it is necessary for greater fruitfulness. God does not take anything away without purpose. If He removes a person, a job, an opportunity, a habit, it is because He sees what is ahead. He knows what will hinder you, what will slow you down, what will keep you from receiving His best. Trusting Him means surrendering to the process even when you do not fully understand it. What you release in obedience, He will replace with. When God is setting you up for a big blessing, He will often test your faith by requiring you to step out before you see the full picture. Faith is not about waiting until everything is perfectly aligned. It is about trusting in what God has spoken, even when the evidence has not yet appeared. The greatest breakthroughs often come when you are willing to move forward without having all the answers, without seeing how everything will come together, and without knowing exactly how God will provide. He calls you to walk by faith, not by sight. Because what he is preparing for you requires a level of trust that goes beyond human understanding. Abraham was called to leave his home and go to a land that God would show him. He did not receive all the details up front. God did not lay out the entire plan before he took the first step. Instead, Abraham had to move forward in faith, trusting that as he obeyed, God would reveal the next step. This is how faith works. God gives you a word, a promise, a direction, and then he waits to see if you will step out in obedience before he reveals the fullness of what he has planned. When Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, he asked if he could come out to him. Jesus simply said, "Come." Peter had to step out of the boat onto the water before he experienced the miracle. If he had waited for the waves to calm or for a guarantee that he would not sink, he never would have walked on water. The supernatural happens when you take the step of faith, not before. God requires action before a manifestation. Faith is tested in uncertainty. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army behind them, they saw no way forward. But God told Moses to lift his staff, and only after he obeyed did the sea begin to part. If they had waited for the waters to separate first before moving, they would have never crossed. God moves when his people move in faith. If he has given you a word, a promise, or a calling, the next step is yours. He will not show you everything in advance, but when you trust him enough to step forward, you will see him open doors, make a way, and bring provision where there seemed to be none. The enemy tries to keep you paralyzed in doubt. He whispers that you are not ready, that you do not have enough resources, that you need to wait for a better time. But the truth is, faith does not wait for perfect conditions. The farmer does not wait for the perfect weather to sow his seed. He plants in faith, trusting that the harvest will come. If you wait for everything to be ideal before stepping into what God has called you to do, you may never take that step. There will always be reasons to delay, always excuses to hold back, always fears that try to convince you that now is not the right time. But when God says move, the right time is now. Faith requires action, even when logic says otherwise. When the widow of Zarephath was down to her last bit of flour and oil, she was preparing to eat her final meal with her son before they died. But the prophet Elijah told her to first make a small cake for him. It made no sense. She barely had enough for herself and her child, yet she obeyed. And because of that step of faith, her supply never ran out. God often asks for obedience before the provision comes. If you are waiting for confirmation before acting in faith, you may be waiting forever. The confirmation comes after obedience, not before. Faith does not rely on human logic. It sees beyond the natural and believes in what God has spoken. It is easy to trust when you can see the way forward. But true faith is trusting when you cannot see the path ahead. When God called Joshua to lead Israel into the promised land, the first obstacle was the Jordan River at flood stage. Yet God told the priests carrying the ark to step into the water before the river parted. It was only after their feet touched the water that the miracle happened. If they had stood at the edge, waiting for the water to recede, they never would have crossed. The blessing God has for you requires faith. It requires stepping out when everything in you wants to hold back. It requires trusting that even when you do not see the full picture, God is still in control. If he has given you a promise, a calling, or a dream, do not wait for everything to make sense. Step forward in faith, and you will see him move in ways that only he can. Faith is not about knowing every detail. It is about believing that the one who called you is faithful to fulfill his word. What God has for you is on the other side of your obedience.